Welcome to the Accelerate Campfire. I'm Lyndon Bowen, and today I'm joined by an amazing entrepreneur. I truly hope you enjoy hearing their experiences and life path. Listen in. So, guys, let's formally welcome Jackie Amable. Jackie currently serves as the managing director for Nextcorps Venture for ClimateTech. Venture for ClimateTech supports New York State's bold vision to become a leader in climate tech adoption and environmental justice. Previously, Jackie was the CEO and co founder of Revolar. At Revolar, she built tiny devices to keep your loved ones safe and raised millions of dollars from great investors such as Foundry Group and Techstars. Jackie is deeply committed to helping our global community solve and evolve moving into the future. She likes to say that at her core, she's a teacher, a researcher, a doer, and a proud nerd. Let's please give a warm, super, super warm welcome to Jackie here today, guys. And you're gonna
Thank
do
y'all for having me.
claps in the chat.
It's cool.
They're not
Cool.
audible, but
Yeah,
I'll do
no,
some
it's
audible claps for us here. Chris is responding. Um, great, 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 great. So we actually have the response to the first poll here. The audience is curious to know what you were doing before you launched your first business.
um, I was in school. So I came up with the idea for my first company when I was still at the University of Florida. My sister had been sexually assaulted twice before the age of 17, and I felt a real need to figure out how to keep her safe. And my dad had passed away when I was a teenager, and so college was this very tumultuous time of trying to figure out what to do. And I stayed in state to stay close to my sisters.
Um,
But I was in school. So I thought I was going to work for UNICEF, although I realized that was not where I was heading.
that's interesting. Like, and how did your upbringing or like your background prepare you to like go into being a CEO like at such a young age, like to set out on this adventure, right?
Yeah, I always said there's like, they say like ignorance is bliss, but there's a certain naivete and confidence that I had.
Mhm.
I was just like, this is a great idea, and y'all are crazy if you don't think so. Um, I always said I was like born to build that company. My family came and moved from Latin America because of a lack of safety. My co-founders, and this is a wild story. Her grandmother was kidnapped by guerrillas and held in the jungles of Colombia for a
Mm,
year. Our family had left feeling a lack of safety, and then so when my sister, then my college roommates and my friends, and I just felt like I kept seeing so many people that I loved hurt, and I kept thinking, well, what if we could just know they were in trouble, right? Like, often you just need to call out for help, but how do you get people to hear you? And so for me, it was really diving into that inspiration and deciding that if we got a rocket to the moon, we can build tiny, discreet, good-looking safety devices that don't look like a
mhm.
life alert,
Right,
um,
right. That's not
and you
obvious.
feel cool wearing them, right? And
Yeah.
so, um, accepted a job with Teach for America, moved to Colorado, and people were like, "Did you know that that was going to be a tech hub?" And I was like, "No, I just wanted to rock climb, and I was excited to do
All
TFA,
the views.
and I didn't know
Yeah,
there was such a thing as tech hubs, right?
yeah.
Like that wasn't in. I hadn't prepared for that, but I would say that teaching was the best job I could have ever had as I was becoming a CEO because teaching one teaches you how to deal with when people say ridiculous things, which as a founder, you're going to hear ridiculous things, right? So I got really good at responding to inane comments with humor, right? Because I learned that, if you snap at somebody, you know, you're not going to get something across to them. But if you have a sense of humor about it or use humor to correct them, um, it, it's a lot easier, but it also taught me that all humans are awkward.
Mm,
So, even the cool kid in the class had, felt awkward. And
right.
so when I went into the tech world, I kind of went in with this mentality of like, I'm going to build bridges into this community.
Mm.
And I'm just going to assume that you're more afraid of me than I am of you. Um, and so I'm going to help you talk to me. And I think that mentality really took me far.
I mean, I think something that's like super interesting about your background, in particular, is like really you've put others before yourself in so many things. Like your work really revolves around helping the community and how can I, lead with a mission that empowers others to live better lives. I'm particularly curious, like as an entrepreneur, like where did that ethos of like problem solving kind of come from? Sorry,
No,
Jackie, could you? Yeah,
yeah, no,
you
where
were
did that
thinking.
ethos come from?
Yeah.
I feel like, and I've talked about this like to my friends in the past, but it's
Mhm.
like the social privilege I have of like my parents came to this country as immigrants and like their mentality was just survive and thrive, right? Like anything to
Yeah.
make sure that their family was stable. Um, and so I felt like I could lift my head up high enough to like look around and be like, okay, like you guys had to do things because you had to do them, right? Like I don't think my
Yeah.
dad wanted to lead sales teams. He actually told me many times he wished he could have been a high school basketball coach. Like
Wow.
but he felt the need to have a certain kind of job to make sure that like we had a certain, kind of life.
Yeah.
And so I felt this incredible responsibility to even out that playing field. I
Hmm.
just saw a lot of inequalities, but I also had this thesis of um impact, especially with technology, is
Yeah.
can be a great equalizer. It's just the business models that don't quite exist. And so at a very young age, I was constantly thinking about like, well, how can we change up these models? How do we evolve them? And so evolving systems has been something that I've thought about for a very long time. And each of the roles that I took were sometimes people are like, oh, that feels like such a leap. I was like, actually, it felt like a direct connection to me. Right. It didn't feel like a leap for me to go from teaching to running a company. I think the skill set was really transferable. And I think the that mentality of service and like listening to your team and
Mm.
um, people are people regardless of age.
Yeah. It's like really the servant leadership, right? Like you're
Yeah.
serving first and leading second. I think that's definitely inspiring. And if people are responding like trusting your instincts, like that's the go through. They're responding in the chat here.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So we actually had the response for the next question in the chat. They're curious to know what was the first thing you brought to your company, and I guess you could answer for Revolar, and you could also answer for the work that you do at Nextcorps as well.
Sure. So wait, what's the first thing I bought for
Yeah, the
my
first thing you
company?
brought to your company, yeah, for your company.
IP, right?
Ooh,
So my first step was I used all my graduation money to file for my first patent.
wow.
And so we had that patent issued 5 years later and another one after that. So I'm really proud of the patents that we received during my tenure there. But it was, patents aren't cheap, and it was a really wild learning process on, because I'm not technical. Like I didn't go to school for
Yep.
engineering. So I had to really rely on people I barely knew, and it took a few iterations to find not only the right patent attorney, but get the right support, put in the right language, have an engineer help me translate that into a patent. So it was a multi-year process, and I was really grateful for the outcomes. And so when we were issued our official patent, it was like one of those um, incredible moments. I actually just got a memory on my phone that was like January 9th of
Uh,
2017. So it was,
of when you issue your first patent. Wow.
yeah.
Audience is curious to know how much was that patent if you're willing to
Yeah,
disclose
no,
that.
I mean, I think by the end of it, it probably cost like 25K.
Jeez,
Just for
that's a
that
car.
one because there's multiple steps, and so like the
Yeah.
first cost was like 5,000 to file the provisional, then a year later you have to file the formal, and then you have to file it internationally because you have to protect yourself. So I couldn't afford to protect us against every country, right? So I had
Yeah.
to pick like the top 5 that I thought would be the countries that I need protecting against. So like the PCT application, and so not. It's funny because like through that process, I now with my founders work often on like patent claims and things like
Mhm.
that, but still not a lawyer. Still.
Just to file, like not even cost of lawyers, like not even. Wow, that's
That's a
crazy.
bit of it, yeah. So it's yeah, it's expensive. I think it's the cost to file with the help of the attorney because I would
Oh, okay,
never.
okay, okay. I was
I
like,
think I would have been
Jesus. I was
scared to try to file that on my own.
yeah, wow.
Like
That's
it's you don't want to screw that up because
yeah.
that once you put it out there, right? If you mess up that up, then it's like open for anybody.
And what was the like? What was it? You would say this is a big piece of advice that you learned from going through that process of like filing and patenting. Like, what did you learn?
I think, and my friend, I think, worded it best once, like getting any kind of business off the ground takes 7 years before you see any kind of real return.
Mm,
And so you have to be a really passionate and then really convinced that what you're building makes sense because you have to wait 7 years before you see any kind of return. So for me, it was a little over 5 years before we got that patent, and probably 6 years before we start to make revenue, right? So I had to work on that business and bootstrapped it for many years and finally got the funding. And so I think a lot of people don't realize, especially as your first business, like my second business would probably move a lot faster because you're
right,
just,
right.
certain things. That first business, like there's no way of learning it except to do it. You just have to do it. Like there is
You
no
bet. Yeah.
there are no there's no shortcuts. Like maybe you worked at a startup and you learn some stuff until you sit in that CEO seat, like and feel that responsibility of like helping other people pay their bills and meeting those bills. Like it's just I always say like I'm a recovering CEO. Like I would think long and hard before taking on that title again.
Before doing it again, you're like, I've been
Yeah.
there, done that.
Yeah. And my husband's a founder, so we're taking turns. He's in the midst of his, and so I always joke that when he's done, I'll go back. But right now, I'm like still learning and recovering.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and what about Nextcorps? What you do with Venture for ClimateTech?
So Venture for Climate Tech. So I decided to apply my hardware and security experience into the climate tech space. My friends at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory really pushed me. Essentially, there's this massive gap, right? There's all this incredible innovation, but nobody to take it to market. And so um, I knew that I wanted to be the managing director of a program. I originally actually thought I was going to build a company in the sustainability space, and it was my former investors who now sit on my board. I remember reaching out to him. I was like, "Hey, look, I have this idea for a company. I'm not sure if it's a company or a nonprofit. I'm still tweaking the model, but what do you think?" And he goes, "Jackie, very few founders used to be teachers.
Mm,
He's like, have you considered running a program because you could 10x your impact in the climate space and help launch 10 companies a year instead of launching one?" And I was like, wow, I hadn't thought about that impact multiplier that
yeah.
way, right? I was just like, hey, let me, and so from my years of mentoring through Techstars Startup Weekend, sustainability, and different programs, I realized that there was this massive gap because like I'd go and talk to these incredible founders who had PhDs and I'd be like, oh, well, it sounds like you need to hire a COO, and they'd get blank stares. And I was like, oh,
You're like,
you've
what?
never
Say
worked
what?
with a COO. So
Yeah.
you need to know what a COO means and does and how to interview for one. And so when this opportunity came up, essentially it was to build a program from the ground up. So like Chris, who's on this call, and I like, built out the brand and the website, like everything from the ground up. And essentially our thesis is, and we have a team behind this, is helping hyper early stage, like absolute top of funnel climate innovators, build out their teams, get their prototyping roadmap, um, and grow to the point that like they are of actual interest to things like Techstars or other investors. So my thesis was if we essentially become part of these teams for like a year, so like a studio model, we can help them
Mm,
um, get to market faster because we need these innovations to commercialize faster, right? We don't really have 7 years. We need these things to hit the
we need
market
it
in like
now.
3 or 4 years, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
these innovations are critical, but they're in deep tech, hard tech, biomaterials. They're not cheap technologies to take to
yeah.
market. So they need to be de-risked and supported as much as humanly possible. So we also provide non-dilutive capital for the companies that make it all the way through the program. So it's a 6 months. We essentially become team members on 10 teams, and we help them in those early days. So like, how do you hire team members when you don't have capital? How do you hire? How do you find a lawyer, and how do you vet that lawyer? How do you, like all the things that I did that first time around, we're applying it on at scale essentially.
You took your learnings and 10x multiplied it to help so many more founders get through the hurdles that you went through. That's
Yes, the hardest part is that they're not your companies. At the end of the day, you're just like, "Oh, okay, good
you're like,
luck,"
okay,
you know.
I've helped
But
as much as I can.
Yeah, like, and, because they'll say things like, "Well, we don't want to leave the program." I was like, you have to grow, you have to go to that next." It's like being, it's kind of like being a teacher. I was like, you got to go to the next grade. Like,
Push them
you
out the nest a
exited
little bit there.
kindergarten, now it's time for first grade, and you got to like do all those things too. So, yeah, I'm really proud of our founders. In our first year, they've raised 8.2 million in grants and a little over 4 million from investors. And the program just ended in November. So the first year of the program has had tremendous success.
Wow, that is amazing, Jackie. First of all, I want to say congratulations on that. Like that is oh, thank you, Chris. Also, guys, there's lots of links that Chris is dropping in the chat. Feel free to check those out. Jackie's absolutely amazing. I'm constantly impressed. Just every day, you just give me something new. I'm like, geez. I mean, I think this is particularly interesting because a lot of these founders are just, you said that in your bio, like you consider yourself a nerd. I consider myself a nerd. They're just hyper specialized in what they do, and they may not understand, like you were saying, COO, or like all the steps necessary to get to their end goal, right? To make a sustainable model around the good that they're trying to like impact into the world. So I think it's really interesting that your company is coming in there. Let's just say we need nerds to survive for real. I absolutely agree. We need them so
You
much.
have to be willing
Um,
to talk to people that are even nerdier than you, right? Like,
yeah,
and help
yeah,
them. And like a huge part of that is like they get so excited about their tech, but when they're talking to
mm,
investors, right? Like they're like, I want to hear about the business, not the tech. And so it's
right,
like a
right.
huge learning to have them, I'll never forget like one of my founders was like, "Do you want to see my chemical formula?" Like his like CO2 bonds with, like, and I'm
Yeah,
like, oh, like that is so cute, but like no. Like I am
like
not
that's
like
great, but no, we don't
do
need to.
not
We don't need
have
to
a
see that.
PhD in chemistry. I just need to know how your technology works. I don't need to see the chemical compounds. So like,
Yeah.
but it's funny because like I'm like I wish I could understand your chemical compound. That is not my superpower.
In particular, I think a lot of entrepreneurs experience that, particularly like when they come from academia, and they're used to being subject matter experts in what they do. But could you talk a little bit about the journey to CEO from being, how have you mentored people from being subject matter experts to being able to be a full stop shop when it comes to like the operations or like knowing who to go and ask when they have questions about running the business?
Yeah, yeah. The biggest thing I coach on is, are you the right person to be CEO?
Mm,
I think a lot of people love the title, don't think about what that day-to-day role looks like. I'm like, do you love Excel spreadsheets? Do you love talking to investors all day and repeating yourself and saying the same story with equal enthusiasm, right? Like a teacher. You got to repeat yourself and have that same
with
level of
conviction.
energy and
Yeah,
enthusiasm the next time around. And
yeah.
I was like, if you are not thrilled to be doing those aspects of that job and like hiring and firing people, I was like, you need to consider finding the role that would make you happiest.
Mm,
And that doesn't have to be today. That doesn't have to be next year. But the climate tech companies I've seen really thrive. I think about half them bring on an external CEO at some point, because they realize actually I should be CTO. I should lead the technology, and I'm going to do my best to prepare this company to be of interest to a superpower CEO. Um, so I've seen that model. Some of them can be the CEO and scale the company. They basically have to decide that they're going to spend the next however many years. I'm like, if you spent 12 years in a lab mastering this technology, or this kind of tech, I was like, somebody spent the last 12 years becoming the absolute expert at finance
yeah.
and raising capital and all these other aspects. I'm like, these are all specialties. And I think that often like business operators don't view themselves as specialists, but it is a specialty. Like it's hard to hire people. It's very expensive to hire the wrong person,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because then you got
Make a
to like
mistake on that. Yeah,
it's an expensive mistake.
yeah.
And so often we talk about like, hey, like, and if you want to keep the title CEO, then maybe consider bringing on a president or a COO that's really strong in sales and finance to balance you out.
No.
So a lot of it is about team dynamics. What do they love to do? Where do they want to spend their day to day? Because I don't think enough founders think about what do I actually like to do, and then you get stuck, right, doing this job that you're like, wow, I didn't expect this job to be like that. And now I've been at it for 5 years and I'm like questioning my life.
Why did I make
That
this
doesn't mean
decision?
that company isn't amazing. It just means that you might be in the wrong role or have not hired the right team around yourself to offload the things that you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, yeah. To prioritize your time on like where your expertise lies, actually. which is like, I guess, a privilege, like, but also desperately needed, right? Because you should do
Yeah.
what you're good at. Because if you're not, then that's going to negatively impact your company. Um, was there like what was the biggest mistake that you would say you've made as
Oh
an
my God,
entrepreneur?
there's so many. I I like it depends, right? Like I had the wrong channel strategy.
Mm,
I made some mistakes in hiring that cost me. Like didn't know how to manage my board all the time or how to manage like, the Palo Alto VCs, right? Like that was just next level. So like it's so funny because I always say like I made a million mistakes and you just kind of like learn from them and absorb them and try to never make that mistake again. But I've no
mhm.
doubt that if I built another company, I'd learn a whole new slew of mistakes you can make. And sometimes you have to make the mistake more than once to really solidify why that was a bad idea.
Sometimes you
But
learn the hard way, right?
yeah, so no, while we did have a lot of success, it was like built upon a pile of failures of things
Mm,
that I screwed up or got wrong and misunderstood.
yeah.
Um,
Would you like highlight a common pitfall that you think other entrepreneurs could avoid,
um,
from your experience?
I think people hear this a lot, but if you decide to raise capital, I think a lot of founders, and somebody put it this way, is like once you finally get capital, it's like you've been starving for so long that you want to just like chug some food.
Mm,
But that's a mistake. Because usually if you raise that capital, the expectations by the time you're out of that capital are 10x. And if you've raised that capital and aren't ready for that 10x, or you don't really understand how you're going to reach and achieve that 10x, right? Like that means knowing exactly who you need to hire and how many and what to spend and where you're going to sell that product and how you're going to sell it. Um, you've done yourself and your investors a disservice. Um, and so it's so easy to get caught up in fundraising and think that will solve your problems, but it really just creates a whole new nest of them. And so, like, I'll never forget, like, I finally got my product nationwide in Brookstone. Like, we were so proud. We were like, yes, launched a product. And I was like, pat myself on the back. I was like, done, did it. Launched a product, shipped it. It's now
nationwide, did it, shipped,
nationwide.
done.
Like, and then somebody was like, what's your peg velocity? And I'm like, my what up?
You know what?
Like,
Yeah, I don't.
what's peg velocity? They're like, well, how quickly is the product coming off the shelves? Like, how quickly are
Ooh,
people buying it? How soon will they put in another order? And I was like,
wow.
I don't, I don't know. Like, and I definitely needed
Yeah.
to know. So, it's things like that that you just like, you don't know until you get there. So, like, everyone thinks, oh, if I, once I get past this stage, it'll be easier. And it's not, it's just a new kind of hard. I think my favorite quote from another CEO is the CEO of Airbnb.
Hmm.
Brian Chesky. He said that being the startup's founder and a CEO is like being a professional athlete, but you have to change what you are professional at every 6 months. So the first 6 months you're a professional ballerina. The next 6 months you have to be a professional baseball player, and the 6 months after that you have to be a professional basketball player. And so like your job shifts so dynamically that like you need to understand what that next stage
Right. Right.
means and immediately get to work on it. You can celebrate those wins, but don't let those wins make you think that you're done.
Because you can't be red actuary. You have to be like thinking in the future. Like you have to be launching the next thing while this thing is already launched.
Or understanding what it means to support it, right? Account
Yeah.
management, marketing, like the game shifts once you at each stage. And so it's enjoying each stage, enjoying the journey, understanding it's going to be hard, um, but also knowing like you're not done. Shipping product does not mean you're done.
It's only beginning.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Um, and what is a piece of advice that you often share with entrepreneurs?
I think the best advice I was ever given, and I like to share this with others, is good news travels fast because you like it to. Bad news has to travel faster.
Mm,
Um, Often people don't want to talk about when something blows up, when something goes wrong, or when you even think you have an inkling that something might be going wrong. But what investors hate are surprises.
mm,
What your team hates are surprises. And so when something bad happens, you have to let people know, and like all you have to know who are the right stakeholders and let them know instantly. Because if they find out from somebody else, which they will, if you don't say that quickly enough, like now they've lost faith in you, they've lost trust, and it could even not even be your fault. Like I think something just actually happened to my like one of my friends. They got bad news on like a Friday, and they're like, "Oh, I'll tell my investors on Monday." Well, guess what? By Monday, somebody had already told their investors, and so they got like a really nasty call, being like, well, "Why didn't you tell us?" And they were like, "It was Friday evening, and I thought I could just wait till Monday to tell you." And the investors were like, "Absolutely not! Like you should have like sent a text, anything. You should have just like raised that alert." And so, like, and that's an easy early founder mistake to make is you think, oh, I can give me a second to process this bad news, so I feel prepared for the conversations. But unfortunately, it's going to happen. It's normal. It's healthy. Like, not everything is going to go well. So you have to get comfortable with breaking bad news. That includes giving feedback to team members. Don't let those things sit in puddle. It'll get worse.
Make a small problem a bigger problem.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or by the time you
And
get, yeah, so it just like you need to do it in the moment, and it's hard.
Erica O was saying that resonated with her. Celebrate those wins, but don't let those wins think that make you think that you're done. So
Yeah.
resonated with her. Okay, well, great. I think that is all that we have for the questions here today. Jackie, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with here today?
Um, I know entrepreneurship is hard. I can only imagine building a company during a pandemic can feel even more isolating. So it's just really awesome to see communities like this where you guys can get together and chat and hear from others. I know the founder journey can be really, really lonely. So don't let it be. Reach out to others, talk to them. I promise you, you're not the only one who's made that mistake or learned that lesson, right? Like, so don't let I know it's extra hard nowadays, but don't let yourself be isolated. I know that can be tough.
If you'd like to join the Accelerate Collective and attend future campfires, visit accelerateamerica.com/join and check out our future guest at accelerateamerica.com/campfire. Take care.